A single gunshot pierced the silence of the night. A woman's form collapsed, crimson staining her arm as she protected a man whom everyone dreaded. When dawn broke, engines roared through the desert roadway as 100 motorcyclists journeyed toward one community. They came not seeking vengeance, but answering a sacred bond of devotion and respect. This is Shadows of Dignity. Before our story unfolds, please share your location in the comments and follow our channel. Each comment, donation, and subscription enables us to deliver more meaningful tales to your world. A roadside restaurant's neon light buzzed in the peaceful desert evening. Within its walls, Amelia Kevin sat by herself, swirling a lukewarm mug of coffee. At 36, she was a former soldier who had wielded weapons on foreign battlefields far from home. Her frame carried unseen burdens, wounds concealed under her coat, experiences carved into weary eyes. The townspeople knew very little about her past. To the community, she was simply the repair shop owner's daughter who had returned home. However, in quiet moments, Amelia could still hear battle's remnants, the snap of rifle fire that perpetually haunted her. On this particular evening, as desert winds swept dust through the parking area, the deep rumble of motorcycle engines disturbed the calm. 12 bikes arrived, their chrome gleaming under the restaurant's wavering illumination. Dark leather jackets bore club patches, the Hells Angels. Dining utensils paused mid-bite. Parents drew their young ones nearer. Anxiety swept through the establishment, yet Amelia remained steady, having witnessed far worse circumstances. She observed the riders enter, their commanding presence weighing heavily, their quiet more pronounced than any murmurs. One man approached the counter and requested coffee. His facial hair showed streaks of silver, his gaze both keen and weary. Jack Razor Malone was his name. While others saw merely a biker, when his eyes connected with Amelia's, mutual understanding flowed between them. Veterans identify fellow veterans, regardless of their battleground. Razor slightly elevated his mug in a subtle salute. Amelia acknowledged with a nod, the faintest grin touching her mouth. The sheriff positioned himself nervously by the entrance, palm hovering over his weapon as if conflict was certain. The community feared these individuals, but Amelia recognized something recognizable, the identical tormented expression she had brought back from combat. The restaurant's atmosphere became strained, thick with silent disapproval. Razor rested against the counter, speaking quietly as he requested additional sweetener from the server. To observers, this seemed routine. However, in that hush, even minor actions echoed louder. For one brief instant, tranquility existed, yet serenity seldom endures. Beyond the walls, a tempest was building, one prepared to crash through the restaurant entrance. The entrance burst open forcefully, striking the wall. 3 individuals staggered inside, boisterous and agitated, reeking of alcohol and radiating hostility. Strangers to the area, their tattoos proclaimed trouble. Their mockery sliced through the space. One noticed Razor at the bar and muttered something harsh quietly. Another's attention settled on Amelia. "Listen here, military woman," he drawled, stumbling toward her table. "Purchase me a beverage." His manner conveyed ridicule, not a genuine appeal. Amelia locked eyes with him, composed and firm. "Not this evening," she replied, her voice remaining level and strong as iron. Razor's expression hardened, muscles becoming rigid, his jaw clenching. The lawman remained paralyzed, terror overpowering responsibility. The intoxicated man sneered, but his companion moved more quickly. Metal flashed beneath the restaurant lighting. "Gun!" He brandished it recklessly, aiming it in Razor's direction. The room fell completely silent, pulses racing, every person motionless. This was the type of instant Amelia recognized intimately, the stillness preceding pandemonium when reflexes act quicker than conscious thought. And reflexes compelled her. The weapon discharged. One thunderous blast, Amelia lunged ahead, her frame striking Razor's. The projectile tore through her limb, blood soaking her sleeve as she defended him. Gasps erupted throughout. Plates crashed down. Razor grabbed her before she collapsed, his weathered hands firm on her frame. "Don't leave me," he rumbled, his voice cracking with raw emotion. Not terror, but rage at her sacrifice for him. Amelia grimaced, managing a pained smile. "Force of habit," she breathed, her respiration unsteady. The shooter's expression widened, comprehending his actions. Pandemonium erupted. Screams and shouts filled the air. The sheriff's hand wavered but never drew his weapon. Legal authority didn't drive events that night. Loyalty did. Razor removed his bandana, applying pressure to her injury. "You preserved my existence," he whispered, his tone carrying more vow than appreciation. "This won't be forgotten." Outside, engines came alive, news traveling faster than emergency vehicles. The angels would learn of this, and their arrival wouldn't be peaceful. Dawn colored the desert golden, yet the distant horizon carried the sound of thunder. Motorcycles appeared individually on the highway, their engines thundering like an approaching storm. 10, 20, 50 machines. By sunrise, 100 riders had gathered. Leather vests sparkled in the morning light, insignias blazing brightly. They hadn't come for bloodshed, they had come for her. Amelia Kevin, the woman who had stepped into harm's way to shield one of their brotherhood. The community awakened slowly, window coverings twitching, gossip spreading quicker than church chimes. To some residents, the scene was terrifying, an army of motorcyclists flooding Main Avenue. To others, it inspired wonder. Razor guided the convoy, his expression etched with determination. He hadn't arrived seeking revenge. He came because a debt of honor had been inscribed in blood. Within the medical facility, Amelia awakened to engine sounds outside her window. To her ears, that noise wasn't threatening, it was a commitment. A warrior doesn't forget those who stand alongside them. Neither did they. The medical center carried scents of disinfectant and stale coffee. Amelia lay supported by rigid white cushions, her arm wrapped securely in gauze. Each breath sent waves of discomfort through her body, yet her eyes remained alert and restless. She despised being bedridden and feeling powerless. Across the space, Razor stood like a guard, arms folded, jaw set. He had remained outside her room throughout the night, declining rest, refusing to depart. Medical staff whispered about the men assembling outside, their patches, their engines, their overwhelming numbers. Some felt afraid, while others experienced an unusual sense of security, as if the hospital was defended by an army. Amelia stirred, breaking the silence. "Your vigil wasn't necessary," she murmured. Razor slowly shook his head. "That bullet wasn't yours to take either." Their gazes connected, hers steady, his intense. For soldiers, action spoke louder than words. Outside, engines hummed continuously, a persistent reminder that everything had changed. One woman's selflessness had awakened loyalty greater than the town had ever witnessed. Information traveled rapidly, first through restaurants, then service stations, finally reaching the church newsletter. By midday, the entire community buzzed with a single inquiry. What brought the Hells Angels here? Business fronts remained partially open, parents kept children nearby, and whispers grew sharp with apprehension. Some speculated revenge, others predicted warfare. However, in the sheriff's station, fear transformed into terror. He had failed to prevent the shooting, and failed to protect anyone. Now 100 bikers waited on Main Avenue, engines growling like predators at the edge of firelight. The gunman remained at large, hiding and trembling in some forgotten dwelling. He hadn't anticipated this response. He thought it was merely one evening, one careless shot. But now the earth itself seemed to vibrate under the weight of consequences. Razor paced outside the hospital, speaking into his phone, summoning brothers from even more distant communities. Amelia, listening from her bed, frowned. "Don't let this become a massacre," she whispered. Razor turned, his eyes softening only for her. "There won't be bloodshed," he stated. "There will be justice." That evening, the shooter's identity emerged. Kyle Mercer, 27, a wanderer with pockets full of obligations and a past full of errors. He had fled to this small community, hoping to remain unnoticed. But now the entire desert had taken notice. Bikers searched quietly, not through violence but through pressure. Gas stations denied him service, locals turned away. He became a phantom walking in daylight, hunted not by weapons but by stares. In the hospital, Amelia sat beside the window, observing row upon row of motorcycles lining the streets. The town had never witnessed this type of organization from outsiders. Razor entered, offering her a cup of hospital coffee. "He'll be located," he muttered. Amelia studied him carefully. "And after that? Will you assault him? Destroy the town?" Razor's mouth curved in a humorless grin. "No, we'll surrender him to authorities. The angels aren't without law regardless of public opinion, but respect belongs to us to claim." For the first time, Amelia understood this wasn't chaos. It was discipline forged on the open road. Night descended heavily, stars scattered like embers across the desert sky. A knock echoed at Amelia's door. A local woman entered, Mrs. Gallagher, gray-haired, shaking, eyes wide with terror. She leaned close, whispering urgently, "They discovered him near the railway yard." Razor stiffened, then nodded once. Within moments, engines roared to life, headlights cutting through darkness. 100 bikers moved together, forming a wall of steel and thunder the town had never witnessed. Amelia rose from her bed despite nursing staff objections, her injured arm secured tightly. She knew this moment couldn't occur without her presence. Soldiers don't hide when their battle arrives. She limped outside, standing on the hospital steps, watching taillights disappear into the night. Her breath caught, heart pounding, not from fear but from anticipation. The town watched as well, curtains pulled back, children peering through gaps. It wasn't law enforcement who rode out that night. It was men once feared, now carrying the burden of honor for a woman who had saved one of their own. They located Kyle Mercer near the rusted railway tracks, attempting to vanish into the night. His hands trembled as he gripped the same pistol, though his courage had drained with every mile. The roar of engines surrounded him, headlights blinding, shadows towering like giants. Razor dismounted first, moving slowly and deliberately, leather creaking with each step. Kyle raised the weapon weakly, but it shook in his grasp. "Stop," Razor commanded simply, his voice deep as gravel. For an extended moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then from the darkness came another sound, the shuffle of boots. Amelia emerged, her arm secured in a sling, eyes blazing despite her pain. "Lower your weapon," she ordered, her voice steady with military authority. Kyle's arm wavered, then dropped. Bikers closed in, not with violence but with overwhelming presence. He was cornered, not by brutality but by loyalty stronger than any prison. Razor looked toward Amelia. She nodded once, and Kyle Mercer finally surrendered, not to fear but to a woman's unwavering bravery. The sheriff arrived behind schedule, sirens piercing the desert silence. He exited his patrol car, hand hovering near his weapon, eyes darting nervously across the sea of leather jackets. 100 bikers formed a circle, their engines cooling, their gazes burning holes into the night. Kyle Mercer knelt in the dirt, wrist shaking, pistol discarded. For once, he wasn't the most intimidating presence, he was the most insignificant. The sheriff attempted to assert authority, but his voice faltered. "He's under arrest." Nobody moved. Law enforcement had been absent when it mattered, silent when Amelia bled. Razor turned toward Amelia, waiting. This wasn't his decision, it was hers. She examined Kyle, chest rising and falling, tears creating tracks through the grime on his face. He wasn't a monster, merely a coward who made a reckless decision. Amelia straightened, her voice carrying across the rail yard. "Turn him over to the law," she declared. The angels obeyed her, not the sheriff. Respect had already chosen its leader. Kyle was pulled to his feet, his body trembling, his eyes darting everywhere. The sheriff handcuffed him, though his own hand still shook around the metal. He appeared more like a drowning man than one making an arrest. As the patrol car departed, Amelia stood in silence, her arm throbbing, her breathing steady. Razor walked beside her, watching the red and blue lights fade down the road. "Things could have been different," he muttered. Amelia nodded. That's precisely why it had to end this way. Around them, the bikers stood waiting, watching her. Not Razor, not the sheriff. Her decision had spoken louder than engines, louder than fear. It wasn't revenge that filled the night air. It was dignity. For the first time in years, Amelia experienced the type of peace she once felt when her squad returned home alive. She wasn't merely a veteran anymore, she was a protector again. And the men who once intimidated an entire town bowed their heads to her choice. By dawn, the bikers remained in town, their presence impossible to ignore. Storefronts opened slowly and cautiously, but curiosity replaced fear. Mothers who once pulled children indoors now watched as bikers assisted elderly men crossing streets, carried groceries for strangers, and stood quietly outside the hospital, guarding the entrance. Amelia sat on the steps, sunlight warming her face. For years she had been invisible, another veteran fading into the background, unspoken struggles buried in silence. Now she was seen, not for her wounds or her past, but for the choice she made when it mattered. Razor joined her, leaning against the railing. "They won't forget you," he said. Amelia gave a faint smile. "I didn't act for remembrance," Razor chuckled. "No, you acted because that's your nature." Around them, the town shifted slowly, understanding that strength didn't always wear a badge, and protection didn't always come in uniform. Sometimes it came from the road and sometimes from a woman who had already given enough. The shooter's arrest made headlines by morning. Reporters flooded the town, eager to capture images of 100 bikers lined like guardians, silent beneath the rising sun. But cameras couldn't capture the real story, the quiet bond forged in blood and sacrifice. In the hospital lobby, veterans gathered to see Amelia. Some she had never met, a man missing a leg, another with burns along his arms. They saluted her not with words but with silence. She returned it with a nod, her eyes moist. Razor watched from a distance, arms folded, letting her moment belong only to those who understood. The sheriff tried claiming credit before the cameras, but the town knew the truth. It hadn't been his siren that saved them. It had been Amelia's courage and the loyalty of men once feared. A young girl pressed flowers into Amelia's uninjured hand.
"You're a hero," she whispered. Amelia shook her head softly.
"No, I simply did what my training taught me." That night, the bikers assembled outside the diner where it all began. Engines idled low, headlights cutting across the desert. Amelia walked toward them, her sling secured tightly, every step slow but determined. Razor stepped forward, extending a leather cut, an angel's vest. It wasn't membership, it was something deeper, a symbol of respect. Amelia hesitated, her throat tightening. She had never needed patches or recognition. But as she slipped the vest over her shoulders, engines erupted in sound, not chaos, but salute. The town stood watching from sidewalks, realizing the truth. Protection wasn't about uniforms or fear, it was about loyalty, sacrifice, and the courage to stand for someone else. Amelia raised her hand in gratitude, her voice low but clear. "We all fight battles. Some of us just fight them on different roads." The desert wind carried her words, and for the first time in a long time she felt at peace. The following day, Main Street felt transformed. Where fear once lingered, quiet respect now resided. Shopkeepers nodded to bikers as they passed. Children waved instead of hiding behind curtains. Amelia sat outside the diner, sipping coffee with her bandaged arm resting on the table. Razor joined her, his presence calm and steady. "Strange," he said, glancing at the townspeople. "Yesterday they feared us. Today they bring us pie." Amelia smirked softly. "Fear is simple. Respect requires time." She paused, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the highway stretched endlessly. But sometimes it only takes one night to change everything. Razor didn't argue, simply raising his cup in a silent toast. Around them, bikers laughed with locals, the sound raw but genuine. The sheriff remained distant, ashamed, knowing leadership had slipped through his fingers. Amelia didn't dwell on it. She wasn't seeking titles or authority. She only cared that people finally saw each other without masks of rumor or fear. Later that evening, Amelia returned to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. In the waiting room, she noticed two young soldiers in uniform, barely older than 19, sitting with nervous eyes. One glanced at her sling and whispered, "Are you her?" Word had spread further than she imagined. Amelia nodded quietly. The boy straightened, suddenly standing taller. "My brother told me about you, said you saved one of those bikers." She studied his face, reminded of boys she had seen shipped off to battle before they'd even learned to shave. "I didn't save a biker," Amelia replied gently. "I saved a man." Silence hung for a moment. Then the boy smiled faintly, as though those words alone gave him something to carry. Razor waited outside, leaning on his bike, nodding at the soldiers as they passed. Amelia stepped out, exhaling the weight of recognition. She hadn't wanted fame, but if her act gave courage to even one young soul, maybe the scar was worth it. The next morning, engine roars rose one last time. The 100 bikers lined the streets, their vests gleaming under the desert sun. This time they weren't there to surround, protect, or intimidate. They were there to say farewell. Amelia walked down the row, each rider bowing his head as she passed. It felt like walking through a corridor of loyalty, every step echoing with the weight of what had been shared. Razor stood at the end, his bike idling softly. "Will you be okay?" he asked. Amelia nodded, though her eyes shimmered. "I've survived worse," he smirked. "Yes, but you've also made us brothers for life." She clasped his hand firmly, warrior to warrior. Then one by one, engines roared and the bikers pulled away. thunder fading into the horizon. The town stood in silence, not in fear but in awe. For years they told stories about the angels. Now they would tell one about Amelia Kevin. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that night remained. The diner hung a photograph of Amelia with the bikers framed near the counter. Veterans stopped by to shake her hand. Kids rode bicycles with toy helmets, pretending to be part of the procession that had once shaken their quiet streets. Amelia's arm healed slowly, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in years. She spent mornings fixing engines in her father's old garage, evenings sitting on the porch with coffee, listening to the desert wind. Sometimes she still awakened to war memories, sweat chilling her skin. But now, when she looked out the window, she imagined the sound of engines, the promise that she was never truly alone. She had brothers on the road, unseen but always near, and in her own town, she was no longer invisible. She was proof that courage could change not only a moment, but the way an entire community saw the world. On the anniversary of that night, a small gathering formed at the diner. Locals, veterans, and a few bikers who had ridden back just to see her. Amelia stood quietly, not at the center but among them. No speeches, no ceremonies, just shared. Silence broken only by the hum of an engine in the distance. She looked around, realizing her journey hadn't ended in war or fear, but in connection. She wasn't just the mechanic's daughter anymore. She was a protector, a reminder that sometimes courage arrives without warning in ordinary people who choose extraordinary acts. Razor caught her eye across the crowd and raised his cup once more. She returned the gesture, smiling softly. For Amelia, scars would always remain, but now, so would the bond she had forged, the kind that outlasts pain, fear, and even time itself. And as the sun set over the desert, she whispered a truth she finally believed. I am not alone. Amelia's story reminds us that true strength isn't found in power, it's found in sacrifice. One act of courage transformed fear into respect, strangers into brothers, and scars into symbols of hope. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and press the bell icon. More stories that ignite the soul await.